Hello and thanks for joining us on Chicago Tonight. I'm Brandis Friedman. Here's what we're looking at. A looming decision for Mayor Brandon Johnson on the police department's controversial ShotSpotter system.
Everybody, is a possible victim.
A week of no internet or phone services at Lurie Children's Hospital. Hear about the impact of the hack. And new federal rules lead museums to change their Native American exhibits, including the field. Learn what's behind the move. And now to some of today's top stories. Jussie Smollett is asking the Illinois Supreme Court to review his conviction. It comes more than 2 years after a Cook County jury convicted the actor of orchestrating an elaborate hoax hate crime attack against himself. His attorney claimed Smollett faced double jeopardy when a special prosecutor filed renewed charges against him after Cook County prosecutors dropped their initial case. Smollett was convicted on 5 counts of disorderly conduct and sentenced to 30 months probation, serving the first 150 days of the sentence in jail. Evictions in Cook County are approaching pre-pandemic levels. The Cook County Sheriff's Office says it enforced nearly 12,000 court-ordered evictions last year. The office's annual report on evictions shows they plummeted as low as 2,700 in the year 2021 because of eviction moratoriums and rent subsidies during the pandemic years. The research also shows the disproportionate impact on the county's Black population, with approximately half of all evictions in Cook County occurring in zip codes with majority Black populations. Educators at 2 Instituto del Progreso Latino charter schools took to the picket line today. Teachers at Justice and Leadership Academy and Health Sciences Career Academy in Little Village are striking after they say little progress was made during recent negotiations. The Chicago Teachers Union-backed educators say they're walking out over what they call a mismanagement of school funds and a lack of bilingual and special education supports for students. The administration previously denied that it had refused to meet minimum staffing needs and instead blamed a nationwide teacher shortage and a wave of voluntary resignations. Visit our website, WTTW.com/news, for more on this story. Demonstrators planning to protest the Democratic National Convention this summer say the Department of Transportation has denied their request to march outside the convention itself.
We demand a permit to march as a gesture of good faith that the police will not introduce violence into our family-friendly protests. The denial letter proposed a second route for the march that is nowhere near the DNC. We refuse to be cast away where those in power cannot see or hear our demands.
The Chicago Alliance Against Racist and Political Repression says its denial letter from the city claimed it wouldn't have enough police officers to secure both the protest and the convention. The group says it plans to protest mass incarceration, deportation, and the U.S.'s role in overseas conflicts, among other issues. Up next, the mystery behind a high-profile hack, right after this.
Chicago Tonight is made possible in part by the Alexandra and John Nichols family, the Jim and Kay Mabey family, the Polk Brothers Foundation, and the support of these donors.
It's been a week since Lurie Children's Hospital's phone and internet services went offline, and there's no telling when they'll be back up and running. WTTW News reporter Amanda Vanicki joins us now with more. Amanda, what's behind all this?
Well, Brenda, so far, Lurie is describing this only as a cybersecurity matter. What exactly that matter is and who's behind it, we don't know, and Lurie hasn't said. Cybersecurity expert Stella Vilavanis theorizes a sophisticated player is behind it.
I absolutely guarantee you Lurie has very good backup systems. I absolutely guarantee you that. They're a mature organization. They're well funded. If an attacker was able to really take down their systems like this was a pretty deep infiltration. They were probably up against somebody pretty significant.
So then it's clear that this was an attack. Any insight into why Lurie?
No, and again, Lurie has not said anything, given no hints. It is not, however, the first healthcare system to face this issue. Chicago's St. Anthony Hospital a much smaller institution, granted, last week announced it was victim to what it describes as a data security incident in mid-December. And the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services is investigating hundreds of cases of breaches of unsecured protected health information. Bill Avanis guesses in Lurie's case, the attackers after money, as in ransom.
But let's not assume, because there may be more to it. A nation-state actor does have value in doing something like this. A nation-state actor will do something like this in order to show that they have a certain power. They might do this to affect public opinion and people feel unsafe.
He says that cryptocurrency has really opened the door to monetizing cybercrime, so he does assume that that is the case here.
Okay, and of course, big question, what does this mean for Lurie patients?
Well, really, confusion and frustration. Lurie says per the protocol for situations like this, it has taken down all network systems. That means no external emails, no external phone calls. Lurie does have a call center open and a website specifically dedicated to this issue. It has some basic FAQs. Now, also, if you try to log into your online healthcare portal known as MyChart, that's down. Lurie says it realizes that this is frustrating and, quote, our investigation remains ongoing and we are working around the clock to resolve this matter. Please understand this process takes time and know that we have highly experienced, capable, and empathetic teams of both internal and external experts responding to this matter. Now, I will share that as a reporter, but also as a parent, I actually called that call center and was told mostly the same information that you can find online. Lurie apologizes, but that it is committed to the same quality of care.
Yes, and I, as a parent, received the email from Lurie as well. Amanda, how is care affected?
Well, no, that's also difficult to say because it can be really on an individual basis. The responder at the call center that I spoke with said that patients should still go to their appointments unless they hear otherwise from their provider. And he did say that after I kind of asked about this, because my kid has an appointment actually this week. Are they going to have the information that you know for what my child needs? He said Lurie does have an internal backup system. So even if I'm not able to access her healthcare information online, that doctors will be able to. There is, however, still fear, of course, that this could impact some children's health care and the services that they need and depend on.
Any final tips, Amanda?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much that we don't know about this. So, of course, there is concern about private information. I'm sure we'll be hearing about that from Lurie when they have more information that they are able to share. But I will add some tips from the cybersecurity expert that I spoke with. And he said, first of all, that this shows why governments really need to be proactive about passing regulations to make sure that companies, that healthcare systems have to make sure that their systems are protected. And then when it comes to an individual basis, he says that you need to follow the advice that has become common for good reason. So things like make sure you don't reuse the same password, use a password manager, and also obvious really here, but do not click on any suspicious links or attachments in emails.
Okay, lots of questions, Amanda. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Up next, new rules spark big changes at a Chicago cultural institution. But first, a look at the weather. Across the country, museums have had to remove or cover up some of their Native American exhibits, including right here in Chicago. Last month, the Field Museum covered many of the displays in its Ancient Americas and Northwest Coast and Arctic Peoples exhibits. That's because of updates to the federal Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. Museums now need consent from affiliated tribes in order to display sacred Native artifacts. Joining us now with more is Matthew Busler, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Pokagon Band of Potawatomi Indians in Michigan. We also reached out to the Field Museum to send a representative, but they declined. Matthew Busler, thank you for joining us.
Yes, it's my pleasure.
So do you think these new regulations are a step in the right direction?
Yeah, I do. I feel pretty optimistically about the new NACPRA final rules that took effect here in the 12th of January. There have been quite a few changes that will allow tribes to achieve repatriation more expediently than ever before.
What do you think, what are you hoping the impact will be?
So So one is that the new regulations have removed a barrier regarding culturally unidentifiable individuals that has been disabling tribal communities from achieving repatriation since the law was enacted in 1990. Now that cultural affiliation can be determined through information other than preponderance of the evidence, tribal communities will be able to consult with one another and come to consensus on the most appropriate transfer of custody recipients and move forward with making claims and begin bringing our ancestors and their belongings home.
To that end, what has been the impact of these institutions being in possession of these Native artifacts, cultural items, even some human remains?
It is extremely detrimental on the spiritual and emotional well-being of tribal communities throughout the nation. To have their cultural patrimony items and their ancestors' funerary belongings being held by the museums and exhibited by those museums is it's harmful to see. And we all know as tribal communities that those items should be with their communities being utilized in ceremony, and those funerary objects should be reunited with the ancestors and placed back in the womb of Mother Earth like they were intended to be.
Again, we did invite the Field Museum to join us this evening. They declined for tonight. But in a press release, the museum said, quote, "These display cases have been covered because they contain cultural items that could be subject to these updated NAGPRA regulations. There are no Native American human remains on display at the Field Museum." It goes on to say the Field Museum is committed not only to compliance with NAGPRA, but to consultation and collaboration with affiliated communities whose heritage is represented in our galleries. Matthew, as we mentioned, the museum has had to cover up many of its displays recently. What is your reaction to the museum's response to these updated regulations?
So personally, I believe that covering the displays that exhibit cultural patrimony items, ceremonial items, funerary objects, that's a good first step. But this NAGPRA final rule is now requiring free, prior, and informed consent before any exhibition of access to or research on human remains or cultural items, and that is going to be very beneficial for tribal communities. Tribes need to be in control of what is being displayed and the narrative behind those exhibits, and tribal voices must inform their own story. Museums should no longer be telling the story for us.
It's been less than a month since the law has been in effect, but what have you noticed so far in your role?
Yes, exactly. It's only been about 3 weeks since the new regulations have come into effect, so we haven't seen a large change yet, but we anticipate a large influx of museums and institutions reaching out to engage NAGPRA process or to inquire on the exhibition of various items and if they are appropriate or not to display. And so there's going to be a lot of work ahead of us.
Do you think the limited capacity that tribal nations face in responding to an influx of requests from museums, do you think that could slow this process down?
I think that it may. There are many tribal communities that only have 1 or 2 individuals, some of which don't have any funding or any capacity within the NAGPRA profession or in that specialization. There are tribal historic preservation officers that are wearing multiple hats and attempting to accomplish all of their tasks from, assuming the responsibility from the state on National Historic Preservation Act work, while also attempting to be proactive on the repatriation of their ancestors and their belongings. And so it's going to be a lot, but I think that a lot of tribal communities are starting to work together. We have the Michigan Anishinaabe Cultural Preservation Repatriation Alliance, which is made up of all 12 of our federally recognized tribes and a couple of state recognized tribes, which those kind of mechanisms will allow us to continue to be expedient and gain consensus from one another and determine who is most appropriate to become those transfer of custody recipients. So as long as you're working as a team, I think that we're going to be able to achieve this still in a rather expedient way.
Matthew, we've just got a couple of seconds left, but moving forward, how would you like to see museums work with Native people and nations and tribes with regard to exhibits and returning items and remains moving forward?
I would like to see institutions start to prioritize things a little bit more effectively. They need to prioritize the compilation of their inventories, and from that point, start reaching out to every single tribe that could possibly be associated or affiliated with their collections and get those open doors of communication started. It's all of our responsibility. We're the ones here in these positions, and it's time to just start communicating with one another.
All right, that's a good place to leave it. Matthew Busler, thank you so much for joining us. Up next, our Spotlight Politics team on a hotly debated policing tool. Stay with us. A big decision for the mayor on whether to keep the police department's controversial ShotSpotter system. An elected school board for Chicago is back on the agenda in Springfield, and violent rhetoric from the Chicago Teachers Union president draws backlash. Here with all that and more is our Spotlight Politics team, Amanda Vinicky, Heather Sharon, and Paris Schutz. I always want to say here with all that and a bag of chips because you guys brought snacks. Heather, big decision looming for Mayor Johnson on whether the city should renew the ShotSpotter contract. I do believe ShotSpotter has also changed its name as of late. When campaigning for mayor, he promised to remove it. What's standing in his way? What's going on here? Has he made up his mind?
Well, the issue is that you have Chicago's top cop, Larry Snelling, saying very publicly that ShotSpotter or sound thinking helps the police fight crime. And at a time where the #1 issue for voters is crime and wanting to not do anything that reverses the gains and the drop in shootings and murders, that means that this is a tough decision for the mayor, even though his base of voters and the progressive organizations are united in believing that ShotSpotter contributes to both the over-policing and the under-policing of black and brown neighborhoods in Chicago. The murder, or I should say the killing of Adam Toledo has been back in the news, and there was an incident just a couple weeks ago where there was a ShotSpotter alert. Police officers responded, saw a man, heard a bang, and fired at the man who did not have a gun and was not engaging in an altercation with the police. Now, no one was hurt, but that's the sort of incident that people who want the ShotSpotter contract to be canceled want to see stopped. It's going to be a big decision.
A lot of critics have said that ShotSpotter alert heightens the tension and anxiety for those officers, and so they go into that scene expecting that shots have in fact been fired.
Correct.
When it hasn't been confirmed yet. Paris, how awkward for Johnson is it the fact that his police superintendent, Larry Snelling, has come out and reaffirmed his support for the system?
Well, I think that Mayor Johnson has been one of those critics, especially on the campaign trail, and that's why they very quietly, I believe, sort of temporarily or extended this contract in the interim basis. So at the end of the day, Mayor Johnson is the one that makes the calls, and if he disagrees with his police superintendent on this might be something that's disagree on. But I would have to say that if no mayor can keep all their campaign promises, this was a big one from the mayor, and he's already facing some erosion of his progressive support over the migrant situation. You would think that going against this promise might hurt him. So maybe they do something. Maybe there's a compromise. I mean, maybe there's another temporary extension.
Came up in
or maybe
conversations with Snelling when you chose the superintendent. I mean, this was his pick.
And maybe there's a check and balance on it that we haven't thought of. You keep the contract, but there's a.
I don't think that it satisfies critics, though.
Yeah, it's not cheap either. So the city has already spent $35 million to set up this whole system. So there would be some sort of loss of the capital investment in the speakers, and it's not clear what would happen to sort of the whole system that has been created over the last almost 5 years.
You mentioned the migrant crisis, Paris. Migrant arrivals continue to stretch city and state resources, as we know. Heather, any sign of the flow of arrivals slowing?
So the flow of arrivals is still increasing. So in the last month, since January 5th, 20% more migrants have arrived in Chicago, nearly 5,600 men, women, and children. At the same time, however, spaces are opening up in the city shelters. The shelters are 9% fewer people than they did back in January. And I think most importantly, there are no longer hundreds of people waiting at police stations or the landing zones or at O'Hare. Today, there were fewer than a dozen people waiting for a spot to open up in the shelters, which I think is certainly something that the mayor would tell us was progress and is ensuring that people are not being exposed to the elements, even though we're in the middle of fake spring right now.
Loving it.
So that is going to be maybe a little bit of breathing room as sort of people try to get a handle on things before the spring, but this crisis is very far from over.
Especially until second real winter returns.
Yes.
Heather, we also know Mayor Brandon Johnson, Governor J.B. Pritzker, and Cook County Board President Tony Preckwinkle, they all met yesterday to discuss the ongoing response. What do we know about how that went?
So we don't know what they talked about, and Governor Pritzker spoke with NBC5's Marianne Ahern and said, oh, we meet all the time, this is fine, which really belies the amount of tension that has been between the mayor and the governor over the question of the base camps and who should pay for shelters and where they should open up. I think it was not by chance that you saw the governor come to City Hall. He has to know that there would have been cameras there that captured him there. So perhaps it's a little bit of sign of détente or perestroika, and they're taking a little bit of this opportunity of this lull that I talked about to sort of maybe start fresh. Who knows?
Amanda, we know that the mayor and the governor have been publicly at odds over this. Any suggestion that this meeting might have eased those tensions?
All we know is the governor's folks say that this was a quote-unquote productive meeting. We know what was not talked about, according to them, is that this issue of shelter space, as you still have the mayor and the governor at odds, with the state promising another 2,000 shelter beds and saying, we're ready to do it, just say where, and the Johnson administration saying, nope, we don't want to make that choice, or unable to make that choice, and wanting those shelter spaces to be perhaps at least in part outside of Chicago. So that apparently was not discussed, and that seems to be a huge void. We are expecting to hear things soon. Again, this was a productive meeting. And by the way, again, not the first. This is something that both the mayor and governor try to push back, this suggestion that they don't get along and that this is a major issue for them, despite the fact that they come out with these very public jabs on policy matters.
Amanda, a recent report in the Sun-Times says that Mayor Johnson only wants to see 10 of the 21 CPS school board members elected this year. That was, of course, a report from the Sun-Times. But what has Johnson's office said about the elected school board and how that'll go down this year?
So, yeah, this was a letter that he wrote to President Don Herman in the state Senate, who has been the one that there's a lot of reversing positions here, but Herman now is advocating for a fully elected board. That is something that, by the way, the Chicago's teachers union had long fought for. Now they don't want that, and there is a suggestion that the CTU has pushed back against, that it's because they don't want to necessarily, or don't have the campaign dollars to fight for 21 seats and instead would rather have half that. A lot of folks would point out that, oh, wait, Johnson has deep connections to the CTU. That's something that Johnson continually sort of tries to make not much of. We don't know where this is going to go. Herman has said that he needs to speak with legislators, speak with senators to decide next steps, and the governor is really taking a hands-off position.
Okay, so someone that Mayor Johnson has deep connections to is, of course, CTU President Stacey Davis Gates. Paris, last week you broke the story that she called on some teachers to, quote, punch their principal in the face. Any word on this from Stacey Davis Gates herself?
She did not return my calls for comment. A spokesperson did not provide any comment. They did provide a statement to their members basically saying the language was figurative. They say it was intentionally mischaracterized. By the way, this principal filed the police incident report. CTU in this statement kind of turned it around and said they've been kind of bullied. Their contract is up, in June, so they're getting ready to negotiate a new labor contract. And the head of the Principals Association, Troy LaRiviere, called for accountability for Davis Gates for these comments and said he believes this is part of a pattern where teachers who are teachers union delegates and members are causing trouble in certain schools against principals. I asked CTU, was there something this principal did that warranted those comments? Again, they didn't answer me. So a lot of the other thing that Troy Lavrier said, it's providing a pretty bad education environment for kids right now.
A lot of questions about that. Obviously, I'm sure there will be more because, as you said, a lot of eyes going to be on that contract negotiation as it happens later this year. Spotlight Politics, Amanda, Heather, Paris, thanks, y'all. And it's election season, in case you hadn't heard. The Illinois primary is March 19th, and the first day of mailing for vote-by-mail ballots is Thursday, people. WTTW News has you covered. Visit our online voter guide for information and video of the candidates, plus a voter toolbox to help you learn when, where, and how you can vote. And thanks to the League of Women Voters of Cook County for their continued support of the guide. You can find it at WTTW.com/voter guide. And that's our show for this Tuesday night. Join us tomorrow night at 5:30 and 10 for Chicago Tonight Black Voices. A look at the impact of ShotSpotter technology as the city decides whether to renew its contract. And a new series from historian and filmmaker Henry Louis Gates on the history of gospel. And we leave you tonight with the music of Toby Keith, the country music giant who died yesterday at 62. Now, for all of us here at Chicago Tonight, I'm Brandis Friedman. Thanks for watching. Stay healthy and safe, and have a good night.
Closed captioning is made possible by Robert A. Clifford and Clifford Law Offices, a personal injury law firm committed to giving back to the community through law and philanthropy.